Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. Now, when Israel and Iran go to war, the world holds its breath. But there's usually this one guy on the sidelines hoping that the chaos doesn't end too soon. Vladimir Putin. Rising oil prices, a distracted West, and weapons diverted from Ukraine, this could be the break Russia's been waiting for. On this episode, we look at why Moscow quietly loves this war and how Putin plans to turn distant missiles into near-term victories. Because when war erupts in the Middle East, the shockwaves are never confined to the region. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Vladimir Putin has condemned recent U.S. attacks on Iranian nuclear sites as unjustified aggression. Speaking alongside Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, Putin pledged support for the Iranian people, but stopped short of detailing any concrete actions.
This absolutely unprovoked aggression against Iran has no basis whatsoever and no justification whatsoever.
Despite a 20-year strategic partnership signed earlier this year, Iranian officials remain frustrated with what they see as tepid Russian support. Tehran is reportedly seeking more robust backing.
As a country that has a strategic partnership agreement with Russia, we have clear positions and expectations regarding Russia's role, both multilaterally, particularly within the UN Security Council, and regionally.
At the UN, Russia joined China and Pakistan in calling for an immediate ceasefire, drawing parallels to the 2003 Iraq invasion and accusing the US of repeating history. Yet, with Russia deeply entrenched in its war in Ukraine, Putin appears reluctant to open another front.
And now let's zone in on the East-planning portion of our show. And let's dive into the story of an unlikely yet powerful partnership, the growing alliance between Russia and Iran since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. This conflict has supercharged the relationship, forging a formidable axis that's challenging the global status quo.
Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, its relationship with Iran has transformed from cautious cooperation to a robust strategic alliance. United by a shared opposition to Western influence and mutual isolation due to sanctions, Moscow and Iran have deepened ties across political, military, and economic fronts. Militarily, Iran has become a key supplier of drones and military technology to Russia, notably the Shahed 136 drones used in Ukraine. In return, Russia has helped Iran build domestic drone production capabilities, strengthening Tehran's defense industry. Politically, both nations have embraced anti-Western rhetoric and increased high-level diplomatic exchanges. In January 2025, they signed a 20-year strategic cooperation treaty, signaling a long-term commitment to mutual support. Economically, sanctions have pushed both countries to seek alternatives to Western markets. This has led to increased trade, joint infrastructure projects, and collaboration in energy sectors, including nuclear technology. But it is not all smooth sailing. Russia's delicate balancing act with Iran's rivals like Israel and the Gulf states has caused friction. And when Middle East tensions flared recently, Moscow's lukewarm support for Tehran raised eyebrows.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. So on the surface, the Kremlin is playing the role of the outraged ally. Moscow condemned the recent US and Israeli strikes on Iranian targets, calling them unprovoked aggression. Putin pledged that Russia would assist the Iranian people in this dangerous new chapter. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi was in Moscow within hours, discussing serious consultations with his Russian counterpart. But beneath the performance, Putin may be seeing nothing but opportunity. Putin has long counted on the idea that the West has a limited attention span, and right now, Ukraine is rapidly falling off the world's front pages. As the United States throws its weight into defending Israel and possibly escalate its confrontation with Iran, Putin's war in Ukraine quietly continues with fewer eyes watching and fewer weapons flowing to Kyiv. And here's why this matters. The United States simply doesn't have unlimited military stockpiles. Missiles, interceptors, air defense systems, the very resources Ukraine desperately needs, have already begun being diverted to Israel. And that's not just speculation. This scenario directly serves Russia's interest. Every missile that goes to Israel is a missile that doesn't go to Ukraine. For Putin, this isn't just about tanks and drones. It's about the long game. Russia has spent years pushing the narrative of a declining, overstretched America. Of course, some Russian officials are adding fuel to the fire. Dmitry Medvedev, the unhinged deputy chair of Russia's Security Council, went as far as hinting that some countries are ready to supply Iran with nuclear warheads. Wonder who he could have meant, Moscow or Pyongyang? But here's a crucial thing. For all of Russia's posturing, Putin isn't going to war for Iran. He doesn't need to. The Kremlin's military resources are tied up in Ukraine, and Putin has no appetite for opening a second front. What he does have is the perfect platform for what experts call performative diplomacy. Russia is playing the peacemaker, the sage mediator, the one suggesting off-ramps while subtly sabotaging any meaningful resolution. And Putin knows his leverage in the Middle East is limited. He can't dictate outcomes in Israel or Tehran. His economy is battered, his military is strained, and Russia's ability to project power beyond its immediate neighborhood is shrinking. But Putin doesn't need to dominate. He just needs to keep the chaos alive long enough to buy himself more time in Ukraine and to fracture Western focus. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Marcin Krzyżanowski, a Middle East expert from Jagiellonian University. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, and thank you for your invitation.
So today we're trying to examine Iran's relationship with Russia and whether or not they are actually one of the beneficiaries of this kind of chaos in the Middle East that's taking place. Now, there's a few lines of thought when it comes to that, but I want to get your opinion on it.
First of all, Russia will always be happy to see a mess in the Middle East, because at the moment its position in the region is quite weak. Russia is not a major player in the Middle East, but is trying to become one. And always when there is a mess, there is a chance for Russia to meddle in. This time, the conflict was most probably too short for them to have enough time to enter, yet they were trying to offer their mediation to both sides, which was refused. However, the good relations between Russia and Iran makes Russia not crucial, but for sure important factor in the whole game.
Right, so several things I want to unpack here. Now, one of the concern earlier on into the conflict in the Middle East is that perhaps Russia will step up and try to play peacemaker, and in this way kind of garners some support from Washington's side for its efforts in Ukraine. Now, it does seem like Trump has no interest in Russia engaging in peacekeeping efforts. Does that change the relationship or the dynamics of be it Russia with with Washington or its relation with the Middle East as well?
For Russians, the most important assets in that case is surprisingly high level of esteem President Trump is given to President Vladimir Putin. And before aforementioned relations with good relations with Iran. However, Russia was failed to support its ally in the conflict, and most of the Russia made anti-aircraft system were proven to be obsolete, outdated, and less functional than any kind of Western, especially U.S. anti-aircraft system. The position of Russia, instead of growing stronger, is weaker than before the conflict, as the Russia was failed to support its strategical allies. A few weeks ago, both countries signed a document of strategic partnership, but Iran is accusing Russia of for obstruction to that, to implementation of the terms of the document. And Iran is afraid that Russia will trade Iran off for the concession in the war with the Ukraine.
So yeah, there's a lot of dynamics at play here, but essentially Russia's attempt at playing peacemaker got shot down, and also Iran's attempt at garnering support from Russia didn't pan out as well either. Do you think this also exposes the kind of weak state that Russia is in right now, be it diplomatically or even when it comes to its own ability to sustain the war?
Definitely, yes. Russia is flexing in its muscles in all possible media, especially in so-called global south. But at this moment, they had a chance to prove that they are a reliable ally and strong player in the region. And they didn't show up with anything helpful for Iran. So it made Iranians and other possible Russian allies to think again about the fruits of cooperation with Russia, which are quite dire and unuseful to use. As such, Russia showed itself as a country ready to fight propaganda wars, but not to help in any substantial way to endangered and battered ally.
And now there's also the concern about the conflict in the Middle East diverting attention from Washington and maybe will slow down some support to Ukraine as well. How substantial do you think that is going to impact Ukraine's effort, especially when it comes to Western support?
It is substantial, especially in indirect way. At the moment, there is ongoing discussion in the United States about the limits of United States involvement in all kinds of conflicts. The entry point was the conflict with Iran, but the discussion soon get wider, and there is a huge party saying that the United States should limit its involvement in every conflict, especially European and Middle Eastern, as they labeled those conflicts as endless wars, impossible to end. So if it is impossible to end, United States should stay away from it to not be harmed by it.
So some line of thinking believes that there's a lateral shift in attention, but would you also characterize this as kind of fueling the more be it war, be it more like an isolationist sentiment inside the United States that would also indirectly impact Ukraine as well?
That's true. That's true, and except for that, there is also a question of limited, very huge, but still limited resources United States has. The more of resources are used, and resources and equipment and money is invest in the Middle East, the less is to spare in the other regions of the world. And for the United States, the most important theaters are Pacific and Middle East. Europe, especially Ukraine, is less important for Washington.
Right, so it does seem like the worry about Ukraine being put on the back burner is something substantial. But what about the Iran and Russian axis? Because speaking of limited resources, is there also a world where, because of this conflict, Iran will be less capable of supplying Russia with arms?
That's another point. Although most of Iranian support for Russia is kind of additional support. Iran is not providing crucial elements of Russian military capabilities. Although Shahed drones and some mid-range ballistic missiles are very useful, especially as saturators for against Ukrainian and aircraft defense. They are very useful in destroying or damaging Ukrainian infrastructure, but they are not crucial for Russians. And secondly, there are very probable information, very credible information that most of the Iranian-made drones are assembled in Russia and manufactured, and their parts are manufactured in one of factories in Tajikistan. So the destruction of Iranian infrastructure will slow down, will limit Iranian support to Russia, but it will not exclude it from the calculation.
All right, and there's also talks about potential raising oil prices because of the instability of the Middle East, kind of also directly helping Russia in terms of its oil income. Do you think that is also something to take into consideration, or perhaps echoing what you mentioned earlier, this conflict has not been long enough for that to be beneficial for Russia yet?
It wasn't beneficial for Russia, but there was a risk of an increase in fuel price. That would definitely benefit from Russia, as the low oil prices means that that Russian oil is less competitive. Because of the sanction, they are forced to give some discounts to the buyers, but fortunately for the Western world, except for approximately 5% increase in prices immediately after Israeli attack, soon the situation was calmed down, and the prices are getting lower and lower, which means problems for not only for Russia but also for Iran, which rely on oil export revenues to balance its budget.
Right, so as we see, there's a lot of aspect going into this conflict. So thank you so much for helping us unpack all of that. I really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thank you very much, and always at your service. Have a nice day.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Russian factories are increasingly relying on foreign labor to fill critical workforce gaps. In 2024 alone, over 47,000 foreign workers were hired, well above the government's official quota.
According to Russian Labor Ministry data, the number of foreign hires exceeded the 40.5 thousand worker limit by 16%. Most came from visa-required countries like China, India, Turkey and Serbia. Officials say the move is necessary as Russia faces a shrinking domestic workforce worsened by demographic decline and the post-Ukraine war brain drain. Demand is especially high for welders, concrete workers and agricultural staff. Experts link the shortages to the war effort and import substitution policies. Many local workers have shifted to the defense sector, leaving construction and mining projects, especially in the Far East, dependent on foreign labor.
A confidential legal report accusing Russia's Wagner mercenary group of war crimes in Africa has been submitted to the International Criminal Court. The report includes disturbing allegations of torture, killings, and cannibalism.
The Associated Press says the report on Wagner war crimes in Africa urges the ICC to investigate the mercenary outfit-linked individuals and the governments of Mali and Russia. It claims Wagner used social media, especially Telegram, to showcase brutal acts across the Sahel. Experts say sharing footage of atrocities may itself be a war crime. Wagner recently announced its withdrawal from Mali, but Russian forces remain active. Around 2,000 Russian fighters are reportedly assisting Mali's army against insurgents following the UN peacekeepers' exit in late 2023.
Russia plans to increase university spots for North Korean students as part of deepening ties with Pyongyang. The move comes amid raising tuition fees and a shift in education policy in Russia.
Moscow will soon expand the current quota of 100 annual spots for North Korean students. Many of those students study technical fields like computer science and material science at universities in Kazan, Moscow and the Far East. Authorities are also supposedly considering possible future admissions for Afghan students, pending approval from Taliban authorities. Meanwhile, Russian students are facing steep tuition hikes, up to 64% at top universities, as the government pushes for more industrial-focused education. According to data from RAEX, tuition costs have risen by at least 25% at 7 out of the 10 leading Russian universities over the last year, affecting disciplines including applied mathematics, computer science, technical physics, and nuclear physics.
That's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.